one of the Taliban had decided that my Fitbit was a spy camera. The Fitbit I was wearing on my hand, and decided it was a spy camera. So as much as I tried to convince them it wasn't, they insisted that it was, and took that, and then and you couldn't reach anyone because you're out in the middle of nowhere. So there wasn't anybody that I could call. There was certainly no signal at that point. So they took my phone and my passport, and they took my whole bag. They took everything. Took my notebook. Went through my stuff, and then I guess separated me from my fixer and my driver. And so then I was kind of moved around from one car to another car to sort of a closet at one point to another back room. So this kind of went on, I think, really late into that night. And when I could talk to the fixer, and he was trying to explain it all, and the poor driver that had taken us out there somehow got roped into all of it too. But eventually, again, when they're trying to make different calls, and an engineer came in to examine the Fitbit, which they then broke. Just little things like that. It was sort of all absurd. But in the end, it was Muhammad Omari who, once he found out that that they detained me, that he was very upset and very angry, and he sent his chief of staff over to mitigate the situation, and told them that they needed to provide me with food and a room and all this stuff. I was like, absolutely not. I just need to go. Just need to go. So then it was sort of, into the early hours of the next day, and then they let me go. So I was able to drive back to Kabul. So that was a relief. But that wasn't fun. That was very, again, you got to be calm, but it was very daunting, because you don't know what these people are going to think or make up or assume.
Yeah.
And so that can be very terrifying. And then the third time was when I was getting ready to leave. I think it was the day that I was leaving, before I was flying out. Well, it was 2 days, day before I was leaving. And there'd been this really awful suicide bombing in the Hazara community on a school. And it was awful. It was like these 50 schoolgirls had been killed. There was gunmen and a suicide bomber, and they'd attacked them as they were studying for these exams. It was I believe it was a Saturday morning, and it was horrific. And so as soon as we found out this had happened, I went down to cover it, and and it was really in the Taliban at that point. They were just sort of awful to deal with, and they didn't want anyone covering it. Obviously didn't want me being there. They wanted to try to hush it up and pretend it didn't happen, and were just really awful to these girls who had lost their sisters and their cousins and their friends, and these poor girls are just a mess, and some of them are injured, and there's still bodies there, and it was just awful. And then the Taliban were trying to get rid of me, even though I had permission again to be there. But yeah, so they decided they would detain me and put me in their police cell for a while, and that was, again, not fun, but eventually got resolved, and I was able to leave, and I went back again to try to finish the story, and then did as much as I could before I got sort of forced out again, and yes, that was my end of my sort of Afghan era, I guess, so to speak. Although I really would love to go back someday, but yeah, for right now, it's just been a really difficult place to work, and I also found that anyone I was working with, whether it was the driver or the fixer, they were also then being harassed by the Taliban, and their lives were being turned upside down. And so I just felt that it was time to step away for a while, because I didn't want to continue to jeopardize these other people.
What was the reality if they hadn't cleared it up that would have happened to you? Because you've covered a lot of the sex trafficking, the sexual assaults in terms of the local populace over in these countries. So what would have been the reality if that random Taliban person, the governor, hadn't said, "Oh yes, I know them," sort it out?
Yeah, I would have spent a long period of time in detainment. Certainly it happened to a lot of friends. Even one of my women friends was there. She was detained. I believe she ended up being detained for about a month before they let her go. She still lives there. So she's still very determined to stay there and do her work there. But and again, other British friends of mine were detained for, I think, 7 months. There's been other foreigners, Americans and things, detained for even longer periods of time. So I probably just would have ended up detained until some arrangement could have been worked out, or they decided that I was innocent, or I don't think it was a ransom. That's usually not the Taliban's MO. It's more just they're trying to. There's either I guess they have to get something out of it, or basically prove that that you're not the spy that they thought you were, and they'll let you go on that front. But typically, the Taliban, it's not a ransom case. If it's like the Haqqani network or something, that's different. That that was sort of a fundraising effort for them, especially during the war there, where they would take hostages to make money. But the Taliban, as a functioning government, that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for whatever deal that they can kind of get out of it. And in I guess in the cases. With my British friends, it was sort of a diplomatic intervention. I think eventually that sort of worked out. But those things really take time. I mean, you can spend, and that always scared me more than anything, really in any country. People always ask you, oh, what's the scary situation? And it's never about terrorists to me, or the bad players or bombs. It's always about these hostile governments. And what they can do. And to me, that's a lot more terrifying, I think, than terrorists, in the sense that they can take you and accuse you of being something you're not. And you can spend the next 10, 15 years behind bars before somebody or your own government can get you out. So that's certainly always been something on my mind, and something that has felt much more frightening to me than any kind of a terrorist situation.
You've spent your journalistic career going into and witnessing some of the worst of humanity in regards to war, what other people can do to people. So it's interesting that you say that the state is a situation and certain countries are the situation that you fear. What countries would you not go into?